Small daily choices shape your entire life, not big, dramatic moments, because most of what determines your future is built in the ordinary, unnoticed decisions you make when nobody is watching. People often imagine that their life will change because of one huge opportunity, one lucky break, or one moment of inspiration, but the truth is far simpler and far more uncomfortable. Your life becomes the sum of the small habits you repeat. Every morning you wake up and decide, sometimes consciously, sometimes on autopilot, whether you'll step toward the person you want to become or the person you're settling to be. And those little decisions, stacked over months and years, quietly build the direction of your entire life. It's easy to overlook the power of these moments because they don't feel dramatic. Waking up early one day won't transform your future. Reading one page won't make you wise. Choosing to procrastinate once won't ruin you. But it's never about the single moment. It's about the consistency of choosing what feels good now over what matters later. Most people don't waste their life intentionally. They waste it gradually through the tiny decisions they mistake for no big deal. The problem is that no big deal 5 times a week becomes your lifestyle. And your lifestyle becomes your destiny. When you understand that your life is shaped in the quiet, ordinary choices, you also understand something empowering. You have far more control than you think. You don't need a miracle. You don't need a perfect plan. You don't need to wait for motivation, timing, or a dramatic turning point. You just need to manage the small choices you make today, because the direction of your life is hidden inside them. The way you talk to yourself when you're tired, the way you handle distractions when they call your name, the way you respond to challenges that are easier to avoid. Every choice whispers something about the future you're building. The difficult part is that these small choices often feel insignificant. Scrolling for 10 minutes feels harmless. Skipping one task feels innocent. Putting off a goal feels temporary. But those tiny cracks in discipline slowly widen until they define how you move through your days. One day becomes a pattern, and the pattern becomes your identity. You start thinking of yourself as someone who doesn't follow through, doesn't stay consistent, doesn't prioritize their own potential. And once you begin believing that story, it becomes even harder to break. But here's the good news: the opposite is also true. Small positive choices, repeated consistently, create a different story, one where you're building discipline, confidence, and momentum. You don't need perfection to transform your life. You need direction. You need small acts of effort performed regularly. You need habits that slowly shift your identity towards someone who values their time and takes their life seriously. When you choose growth, even in the smallest way, you cast a vote for the kind of person you want to become, and those votes add up. What most people misunderstand is that greatness isn't built through rare moments of inspiration. It's built through ordinary moments of commitment. The impactful part of your day isn't the big speech, the high-energy decision, or the perfectly planned routine. It's the seemingly boring decision to try again, to show up, to do the next right thing. The people who appear disciplined aren't superhuman. They're consistent. They're simply aware that the little choices matter more than the big ones. When you start paying attention to your small decisions, you take back control of your life. You begin to see that every day gives you hundreds of chances to move closer to the future you want or drift further from it. And when you treat those chances with respect, your direction becomes clearer, your confidence becomes stronger, and your life begins to shift in ways that once seemed impossible. Distraction is the silent thief that steals your potential without making noise, because it never feels dangerous in the moment. It feels harmless, comfortable, even deserved. You tell yourself you're just taking a short break, just checking your phone, just stepping away from your responsibilities for a moment. But distraction rarely arrives as a threat. It arrives as relief. And that's why it's so powerful. It doesn't have to push you off track. It just gently pulls your attention away from the things that matter most. And before you realize it, hours, days, and even years can disappear into the background of things that never moved your life forward. The real danger is that distraction doesn't feel like a big mistake. If something felt harmful, you'd avoid it. But distraction disguises itself as entertainment, as rest, as connection, as something that everyone else is doing. It convinces you that losing a little bit of time isn't a problem. But time is not lost in chunks, it's lost in fragments. A few minutes here, a few scrolls there, repeated thousands of times, shape a life that never reaches its potential. Not because you weren't capable, but because your attention was never fully present long enough to build anything meaningful. And this silent theft builds a subtle kind of regret, the kind that grows slowly because you can't point to one moment where everything fell apart. You can only look back and realize how often you traded your future for something that entertained you temporarily. The displays, notifications, and endless streams of content are engineered to feel urgent when they aren't. You don't notice the cost until the bill comes due. And by then, the time you wasted isn't refundable. The saddest part is that most people won't admit distraction is controlling them because it's so normalized. When everyone around you is distracted, being focused feels almost strange. But distraction doesn't only steal your time, it steals your clarity. When your mind is constantly switching between inputs, you lose the ability to concentrate deeply. You lose the ability to think clearly. You lose the ability to stay with a difficult task long enough to grow through it. Your brain gets used to constant stimulation, and anything slower, quieter, or more meaningful begins to feel boring. And when boredom becomes unbearable, productivity becomes impossible. Important work becomes something you avoid, not because it's difficult, but because your mind has been trained to chase quick dopamine instead of long-term reward. What's often misunderstood is that eliminating distraction isn't about being strict or boring. It's about protecting the parts of your life that actually matter, your goals, your skills, your growth, your relationships. These things require presence. They require sustained attention. And when distraction drains that attention, you show up to your own life half engaged, half aware, and half invested. You can't build a strong future with a distracted mind. You can't develop discipline, creativity, or self-respect when your focus is constantly being pulled in 1,000 small directions. But here's the empowering part. The same attention that distraction steals is the attention that can transform your life when you reclaim it. You don't need to eliminate every distraction overnight. You just need to become aware of how often you're giving your time away without realizing it. When you start choosing intentional moments of focus, even for a few minutes, you begin taking your mind back from everything that has been controlling it. You start seeing progress in places where you once saw stagnation. You start feeling pride in choices that once felt impossible. The truth is, distraction will always be available. It will always offer the easiest escape. But potential doesn't grow in escape, it grows in presence. And when you decide to protect your attention the same way you protect anything valuable, you begin to create a life shaped by purpose instead of impulses, by direction instead of drift, and by clarity instead of noise. Excuses feel comforting now but become painful later because they offer immediate emotional relief at the cost of long-term regret. When you make an excuse, you're not trying to deceive the world. You're trying to protect yourself from discomfort. You're trying to avoid the feeling of being unprepared, overwhelmed, or afraid of failing. Excuses create a soft landing for your fears. They let you step away from responsibility without having to face the discomfort of effort or the vulnerability of trying. In the moment, this feels good. It feels safe. It feels justified. But what feels comforting right now often becomes the very thing that keeps your life stuck in the same place for years. The tricky thing about excuses is that they sound reasonable. You tell yourself you're too tired, too busy, too stressed, not ready, not confident enough. You tell yourself the timing isn't right, the situation isn't ideal, or you'll start when things calm down. And in the moment, those explanations feel true. But the truth is that excuses are stories designed to protect your comfort, not your future. They keep you from confronting the tough but simple reality. Growth requires action, and action requires stepping into discomfort. Every excuse you make is a trade. You trade temporary comfort for long-term progress, and over time, those trades accumulate into a life shaped more by avoidance than intention. The painful part comes later, when you realize how many opportunities slipped away because of a story you told yourself. Regret rarely comes from failure. It comes from the moments you never even gave yourself the chance to try. It comes from the goals you postponed, the habits you didn't build, the ideas you dismissed before they had the chance to take form. Excuses steal possibilities. They keep your future small, predictable, and safe, but safe in the worst way, safe like a cage. As time passes, the excuses that once felt protective start to feel limiting. They become reminders of what you avoided, not what you overcame. And excuses don't just affect your results, they affect your identity. Every time you choose an excuse over action, you reinforce the belief that you can't handle discomfort, that you're someone who avoids challenges, that you're someone who backs down when things get difficult. Slowly, without noticing it, you shape an identity built on limitation. You start seeing yourself through the lens of what you didn't do rather than what you're capable of doing. And once you believe that identity, breaking free becomes even harder. You don't just have to overcome the task, you have to overcome the story you created about yourself. But the good news is that the cycle can shift the moment you recognize that excuses are habits, not truths. They're patterns you learned, not realities you're bound to. And just like you learned to default to excuses, you can learn to challenge them. You can replace "I can't" with "I'll try," "I'm not ready," with "I'll start anyway," "I'm afraid," with "I'll do it scared." You don't need to eliminate excuses all at once. You just need to interrupt them. You need one moment of honesty where you admit that the excuse feels good now but will hurt later. That honesty becomes the spark for change. What most people fail to see is that discipline doesn't start with action. It starts with truth. The truth about what you want, the truth about what you're avoiding, the truth about how your excuses are shaping your future. And when you face that truth, even quietly, even alone, you reclaim your power. You stop letting comfort dictate your life. You start moving toward what actually matters, even if it's harder in the moment. Because the pain of discipline is temporary, but the pain of regret becomes permanent. And when you choose action over excuses, you build momentum. You create evidence that you're capable. You start seeing progress where there was once stagnation. You build a new identity, one that doesn't hide behind explanations but moves forward despite them. The comfort of excuses fades quickly, but the discomfort of effort turns into growth, confidence, and self-respect. And when you realize that choosing action now saves you from pain later, excuses lose their power, and you begin to build a life driven by purpose instead of avoidance. Your future depends on the boundaries you set today, because without boundaries, your time, energy, and identity become accessible to anyone and anything that demands them. Most people don't lose control of their life in one sudden moment. They lose it gradually through the small compromises they make when they're afraid to say no, when they want to avoid conflict, or when they worry too much about how others will react. Boundaries aren't walls that push people away. They are filters that protect what matters. They tell the world how you expect to be treated, and more importantly, they tell you how seriously you take your own life. Without them, you end up living according to other people's expectations instead of your own intentions. The uncomfortable truth is that life will always pull at you. People will always ask for more of your time, more of your attention, more of your energy than you can afford to give. Opportunities, distractions, Responsibilities and obligations will compete for space in your day. And if you don't choose what gets your focus, someone else will choose for you. Boundaries are how you take ownership of your direction. They are how you protect your mental clarity, your emotional well-being, and your long-term goals from being swallowed by everything that seems urgent but isn't truly important. Most people struggle with boundaries because they misunderstand them. They think setting a boundary is rude, selfish, or aggressive. They fear hurting someone's feelings or looking difficult. But boundaries aren't about shutting people out. They're about keeping yourself intact. They're about recognizing your capacity and honoring it. When you don't set boundaries, you overpromise, or overgive, and overextend yourself until you're exhausted, frustrated, or resentful. And that resentment is what truly damages relationships. Saying yes too often doesn't make you kind, it makes you depleted. And when you're depleted, you can't show up as your best self for anyone. The boundaries you set today quietly shape who you become tomorrow. When you protect your time, you create space for growth. When you protect your energy, you create room for clarity. When you protect your attention, you give yourself the chance to build something meaningful. If you want a future with purpose, discipline, or success, you have to start by protecting the habits that lead you there. Boundaries are not restrictions, they are permissions. They give you permission to focus, permission to rest, permission to evolve, permission to prioritize the life you want instead of the life others expect from you. And the truth is, other people benefit from your boundaries too. When you communicate clearly, you eliminate confusion. When you stop overcommitting, you stop disappointing people. When you respect your limits, you become more authentic, more stable, and more dependable. Boundaries create healthier relationships, not weaker ones. They remove the pressure to constantly please everyone, and they replace it with honest expectations. People don't respect you less when you have boundaries. They respect you more because they can see you respect yourself. But setting boundaries isn't about making one big announcement. It's about the small decisions you make every day. The decision to say no when something doesn't align with your priorities, the decision to walk away from conversations that drain you, the decision to stop explaining yourself to people who don't listen, the decision to honor your own needs instead of burying them. Each small boundary is a message to yourself that your life matters. And those messages, repeated consistently, build self-confidence, self-respect, and a sense of direction that can't be shaken by someone else's expectations. Your future is built in the space you protect. It grows in the time you don't give away. It strengthens in the energy you refuse to waste. And the boundaries you set today determine how much of your potential you get to keep. Without them, you end up living reactively, always responding to other people's urgencies. With them, you begin living intentionally, guided by your own values and your own vision. Boundaries are the quiet decisions that shape a loud future. And the sooner you set them, the sooner your life becomes your own. Comfort is a trap. Growth begins the moment you step out of it, because comfort convinces you that staying the same is safer than becoming more. It feels warm, familiar, predictable. It asks nothing from you, challenges nothing in you, and exposes nothing about you. And that is exactly why it becomes dangerous over time. Comfort is the quiet anchor that holds you in place while life keeps moving forward. It doesn't hurt you all at once. It slowly weakens your drive, your discipline, and your belief in what you're capable of. Growth, on the other hand, is uncomfortable by design. It demands effort, honesty, and courage. It pushes you to face the parts of yourself that you'd rather ignore. And that tension, the stretch between what's easy and what's necessary, is where real transformation happens. The nature of comfort is deceptive. It feels good in the moment, and it tricks you into thinking you've chosen peace, rest, or stability. But comfort without purpose turns into stagnation. You begin to repeat the same days over and over, mistaking familiarity for progress. You stick with the same habits, the same routines, the same excuses because they don't require anything extra from you. The brain loves what it already knows, and comfort feeds that craving for the predictable. But a predictable life is not the same as a fulfilled one. Eventually, the comfort that once felt peaceful begins to feel suffocating because you know deep down that you're capable of more than what you're settling for. Stepping out of your comfort zone isn't about grand gestures or sudden big decisions. It's about choosing the slightly harder thing over the easy thing consistently. It's waking up a little earlier, starting the task you've been avoiding, having the difficult conversation you keep postponing, or taking the first small step toward a goal you've been too afraid to chase. These actions don't feel extraordinary in the moment. In fact, they often feel awkward, uncomfortable, and unfamiliar, but discomfort is evidence of growth. It means you're stretching beyond the limits you once accepted. It means you're entering new territory where you get to build new skills, new confidence, and a new identity. The fear of leaving comfort often isn't fear of difficulty. It's fear of the unknown. You don't know how things will turn out, so you stay where everything feels predictable. But predictability comes with a price, the cost of never discovering who you could have been. Growth requires uncertainty. It requires situations where you don't feel fully ready or fully in control. The people who grow the fastest aren't the ones who feel fearless. They're the ones who move forward despite feeling afraid. They understand that discomfort is temporary, but the benefits that come from pushing through it last for years. Comfort also affects your self-perception. When you consistently avoid challenges, your mind begins to form a story that you aren't capable of handling difficulty. That story becomes your identity, and it limits you far more than any challenge ever could. The moment you start saying, "This is just who I am," you shut the door on who you could become. But when you push through discomfort even once, you create a new kind of evidence for yourself. You prove that you can try, that you can stretch, that you can rise to a challenge. And every time you take that step, your identity shifts from someone who avoids discomfort to someone who can handle it. That shift is powerful. It opens the door to opportunities you once thought were too big, too risky, or too unrealistic. The truth is, growth never happens inside your comfort zone. Comfort keeps you still, but growth requires movement. It requires being challenged, being stretched, being tested. It requires doing things that feel difficult until they eventually feel natural. Every skill you admire in others was built through discomfort. Every success story you respect was shaped by someone choosing growth over ease. Every version of you that you dream of becoming lives on the other side of the challenges you're avoiding. And when you finally choose to step out of your comfort zone, something unexpected happens, your comfort zone expands. What once felt intimidating becomes normal. What once felt impossible becomes routine, and each step forward creates more room for you to grow. Comfort isn't the enemy. It's just not the goal. The goal is to live a life you're proud of, one that reflects your potential instead of your fears. And that life begins the moment you choose discomfort over ease, growth over safety, and progress over predictability. Your life changes when you take responsibility instead of waiting for motivation, because responsibility gives you control, while waiting keeps you stuck in the same loop of excuses, hesitation, and temporary bursts of inspiration that never last. Most people wait for the right mood, the perfect day, or the spark of motivation to begin improving their lives. But motivation is unreliable. It comes and goes without warning. It rises when life feels exciting and disappears the moment things get hard. If you build your future on something that's inconsistent, you'll never build anything that lasts. Responsibility, however, is different. It doesn't depend on emotion. It depends on choice. When you decide to take responsibility, you stop negotiating with your feelings and start honoring your commitments. Taking responsibility doesn't mean blaming yourself for everything. It means owning your decisions, your habits, and your direction. It means acknowledging that your progress is in your control even when circumstances aren't. It means understanding that no one is coming to push you, motivate you, or save you. And that truth can feel heavy at first, but it becomes liberating once you accept it. Because when you realize that your life is yours to shape, you also realize that you don't have to wait to begin. You don't need to feel ready. You don't need permission. You just need to start. What people misunderstand is that responsibility and motivation aren't enemies. They're in a sequence. Motivation comes after responsibility, not before. When you take action, when you show up even on days you don't feel like it, you create momentum, and momentum creates motivation. You don't wait for energy to move. You move to create energy. This is why people who rely on motivation make inconsistent progress, while people who rely on responsibility build discipline. Discipline is the quiet, steady force that shows up long after motivation fades. It's what turns goals into habits and dreams into achievements. Responsibility also forces you to confront the truth about your patterns. When you take responsibility, you can no longer blame time, circumstances, or other people for your lack of progress. You have to look at how you use your time, how you handle distractions, how you respond to challenges, and how often you let comfort override commitment. That kind of honesty can be uncomfortable, but it's necessary. You can't change a pattern you refuse to acknowledge. Responsibility isn't about guilt. It's about awareness, and awareness is the first step toward growth. The moment you stop waiting for motivation, your relationship with effort changes. You stop seeing effort as something optional and start seeing it as part of who you are becoming. You stop waiting for perfect conditions and start creating progress in imperfect ones. You begin to understand that consistency matters more than intensity. You don't need to do things perfectly. You just need to show up repeatedly. Responsibility turns action into a habit rather than a reaction to how you feel in the moment. And when you build a life on responsibility, you build confidence. Confidence doesn't come from hype or positive thinking. It comes from evidence. Evidence that you keep your word, evidence that you follow through, evidence that you can trust yourself to take action even on difficult days. Every responsible choice becomes a vote for the person you're trying to become. Over time, those votes accumulate into a new identity, one built on strength, discipline, and integrity. And once your identity shifts, your actions follow naturally. You don't have to force yourself to try. You've become the kind of person who does. This shift also affects how you handle setbacks. When you rely on motivation, a bad day can break your momentum. But when you rely on responsibility, a bad day is just a day. You regroup, refocus, and return. You don't spiral into self-blame or wait for motivation to return. You simply start again. Responsibility builds resilience. It teaches you that progress isn't about being perfect. It's about being persistent. It's about choosing effort over avoidance, direction over distraction, and ownership over excuses. And the most powerful part of taking responsibility is that it gives you freedom. Freedom from waiting, freedom from relying on emotion, freedom from the belief that something outside of you needs to change before you can. When you take responsibility, you realize that the power to transform your life has been within you the entire time. And the moment you choose to use that power, your entire future begins to shift